Imagine a country the size of Pennsylvania, sealed off from the world, whose capital sits within artillery range of its enemy's biggest city. And yet, it stares down three of the richest democracies on Earth with a poker face and a pocket full of missiles. That country is North Korea. And as 2026 dawns, the question is simple and unsettling. How insanely powerful is the Korean People's Army right now? To answer that, we have to split myth from metal, bluster from capability. Pyongyang's propaganda paints a military that could swat away aircraft carriers like flies. Skeptics roll their eyes and say it's all parade paint and plywood. Somewhere between those extremes lies a force that's old in places, surprisingly modern in others, and far more dangerous than many want to admit. And yes, if you're wondering, it really does keep planners in Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington up at night. Reuters' broad brush numbers remain a useful starting point. Roughly 1.3 million active troops, millions more in reserve and paramilitary, thousands of tanks and armoured vehicles, hundreds of combat aircraft, and one of the world's largest submarine fleets by hull count. Much of it Soviet era, all of it pointed south. North Korea's military DNA was written in a crucible. The 1950 to 1953 war froze the peninsula in an armistice and taught Pyongyang two harsh lessons. First, conventional war against a US-backed South is a losing bet. Second, survival requires asymmetric leverage. From Kim Il-sung's People's War to Kim Jong-il's Songun, military first, and Kim Jong-un's missile-fueled deterrence, the strategy has evolved, but the thesis remains: threaten enough pain that no one kicks the hornet's nest. That thesis hardened into law in 2022 when Pyongyang formalized nuclear use guidelines at home, and it's been reinforced by a 2024 treaty with Russia that includes a mutual defense clause, a historical pivot that turns a fraying friendship into something closer to an alliance. If either is attacked, the other pledges military assistance, a phrase that has set off alarms from Seoul to Brussels. Let's talk raw mass first. The Korean People's Army ground force remains the bulkiest branch, entrenched along the demilitarized zone like an iron hedge. Many of its hulls are old, T-55 and T-62 derivatives with local names. But mass still matters in a peninsula war of hours and days. Bolt on modernized guns, night sights, and thermal imaging. Park them behind overlapping minefields and anti-tank belts, and the old can still be lethal. For Seoul, the nightmare has never been a single supertank. It's the wall of steel and artillery that could turn the areas north of the Han River into a furnace if war ever broke out. Reuters' synthesis captures the paradox: huge inventories and close deployments near the DMZ, but aging platforms and doubtful serviceability. That paradox is precisely why North Korea leans so hard on asymmetric tools. Nukes, missiles, special forces, cyber, and long-range artillery to even the odds. But Pyongyang isn't just polishing museum pieces. Over the past few years, state media rolled out an entirely new main battle tank, the so-called M2020, and then had Kim Jong-un literally test drive it in a televised mock battle. On paper, it's a Frankenstein's monster in the best sense. Western-style thermal sights, a 125mm gun derived from Russian designs, a remote weapon station, even an anti-tank missile launcher bolted onto the turret like a set of chrome bullhorns. Analysts debate what's real versus parade flair, but footage released in 2023 showed a hard-kill intercept against an RPG, a capability that, if genuine, would be a leap for the KPA. The catch? Mounting active protection launchers in cutouts on the turret could create vulnerabilities, and reloading external ATGMs under fire is optimistic. In other words, it's part technology demo, part military theatre, and still a meaningful signal that North Korea can assemble modernized armour when it wants to. Artillery is where the KPA's reputation becomes more than rumour. Thousands of tube and rocket systems line the frontier, including the 170mm Koksan guns and large-caliber, multiple-launch rocket systems, capable of reaching Greater Seoul. The raw physics of that threat haven't changed. A sudden burst of fire could overwhelm civilian districts and military nodes before Allied air power suppresses the batteries. One reason deterrence on the peninsula is as much about psychology as hardware. Washington knows this, Seoul knows this, and Pyongyang knows that everyone knows it. That's deterrence by catastrophe.
Then there's the Air Force, a relic museum that can still bite. The KPA Air Force fields MiG-29s and MiG-23s alongside swarms of older jets. Most are short-legged and maintenance-starved, and many airframes are likely non-operational at any given time. But they sit under increasingly layered air defences that include domestic long-range SAMs, and Pyongyang has showcased tests of new surface-to-air missiles. Most recently, a long-range variant Kim observed in late 2025. A tired fighter with a fresh missile belt still complicates any air campaign, and North Korea has tuned its doctrine around that hard fact. Sea power used to be a footnote, patrol boats, midget subs, and safe harbours for smugglers. But in 2023, Pyongyang unveiled a tactical nuclear attack submarine, a heavily modified Romeo class, and in late 2025 it went further, parading an 8,700-ton nuclear-powered submarine under construction. State media claims it's near operational. The world is skeptical, but very interested. Even rumours of a nuclear boat matter, because a survivable sea-based deterrent, real or staged, changes how many angles Allied planners must cover. South Korea's military publicly flagged the new sub-push as destabilizing, and it's impossible to ignore how well that narrative dovetails with Russia's promise to help North Korea with space and defense technologies under their 2024 pact. Which brings us to the crown jewels, nuclear weapons, and the missiles that carry them. SIPRI's 2025 yearbook places North Korea's assembled warheads at about 50, with enough fissile material to potentially grow toward 90 if production stays on current tracks. We don't know the exact yields, we don't know the reliability of every design, and we don't know how many can be mated to missiles on short notice. But the trend is unmistakable. More cores, more delivery systems, and more confidence. That's why 2026 feels heavier than, say, 2016 ever did. Delivery systems are where Kim's engineers have hustled. In 2023, North Korea successfully flight tested the solid-fuel Hwasong-18 ICBM, a harbinger of road-mobile missiles with shorter fueling cycles and fewer launch signatures. In 2024 and early 2025, Pyongyang showcased an intermediate-range, solid-fuel missile with a hypersonic glide vehicle, the Hwasong-16B, while state media and allied sensors logged multiple tests of both ballistic and cruise systems. Hypersonic marketing aside, the important thing is maturation. Solids for speed and survivability, cruise missiles for low-altitude evasion, and a continuing march towards salvos that can complicate Allied missile defense. In late December 2025, North Korea capped the year by firing long-range, strategic cruise missiles into the Yellow Sea, a pointed reminder that ballistic bans don't cover cruise launches. If you like parades, and Pyongyang does, 2025 delivered theatre. The Hwasong-20, a new intercontinental range missile, rolled past Kim and foreign dignitaries in October. Analysts parsed every rivet and axle, solid fuel, multiple warheads. But beyond the technical speculation, the message was clear. More tells, more cans, more options. When your entire strategy is to convince adversaries that some fraction of your missiles will get through, the optics of scale matter. The sky isn't just for missiles anymore. North Korea successfully put its Malyaeong-1 reconnaissance satellite into orbit in November 2023 after 2 failed tries, and by early 2024, Western trackers observed small orbit-raising burns that suggested real onboard propulsion and ground control. No one outside the system has seen convincing high-resolution imagery, and South Korea has downplayed its effectiveness. But for a country under blockade, even a rudimentary eye in the sky is a significant step. The military utility today might be modest. The learning curve for tomorrow
is the real story. Caution: if the missiles and satellites are the visible tip, cyber is the submerged hull. The Lazarus Group and other DPRK-linked operators have become world-class thieves, stealing and laundering cryptocurrency to fund sanctioned programs. Chainalysis and other trackers estimate billions siphoned over recent years, with 2024 among the worst on record. And the Financial Times reported fresh evidence of DPRK-linked hacks on regional exchanges in 2025. Sanctions choke trade. Cyber heists pry the fingers off the throat. It's cheap, deniable, and scalable, the kind of capability Pyongyang loves. And then there's the Russian connection, the twist that may define the 2020s. In late 2023 and throughout 2024, debris analysis and allied intelligence indicated Russia was firing North Korean ballistic missiles and shells at Ukraine. By early 2025, Ukrainian officials were publicly noting improved accuracy on the imported KN-23/24 series and tallying roughly 100 shots fired. The International Institute for Strategic Studies, working with field investigators, traced components inside recovered North Korean missiles back to foreign supply chains, underscoring how sanctions leakage equips Pyongyang's factories. The DPRK Russia pipeline isn't theoretical anymore. It's been measured in shrapnel. Reports went further, thousands of North Korean personnel deploying to Russia for construction or rear area roles, with multiple outlets describing troop movements and cadres in Russian regions bordering Ukraine. The numbers vary by source and are hard to independently verify, but several reputable outlets, including Reuters and Le Monde, have reported deployments or training stints, while Associated Press covered Russian ratification of the Mutual Defense Treaty amid US claims of up to 10,000 DPRK troops in Russia. Even if not in frontline combat, that exposure delivers something Pyongyang hasn't had since the 1950s: contemporary wartime experience and a political IOU from Moscow. If you're wondering where the world's referees went, here's the kicker. In March 2024, Russia vetoed the UN Security Council's annual renewal of the panel of experts that monitored North Korea sanctions. The sanctions legally remain, but the neutral watchdog has ended. Western governments called it a gift to sanctions evaders. 38 North detailed how the final report had already flagged oil cap busting by multiples. Since then, a patchwork multilateral sanctions monitoring team, led by the US and partners, has tried to fill the gap, but the enforcement picture is dimmer and more political than before. That matters because a military like North Korea's is sustained as much by what it can sneak in as what it can build. So how strong is the KPA in 2026, really? Start with the strengths. First, credible nuclear delivery. Fewer than the big powers, but enough to guarantee terrible costs. CPRI's estimate of 50 assembled warheads with growth potential anchors that deterrent in something more than rhetoric. Second, missile variety and survivability. Solid fuel IRBMs and ICBMs reduce launch prep windows. Maneuvering re-entry vehicles and hypersonic glide planes, proven or not, force defenders to budget for the worst case. Third, conventional asymmetry. Long-range artillery, massed rockets, entrenched infantry, and a very large special operations force offer a short, sharp opening punch. Fourth, resilience through networks. Satellites in embryo, cyber money streams, and sanctions evading logistics through Russia and China's border economies. Now the weaknesses. North Korea's air force is aging, fuel constrained, and training limited. Its navy's claim to a nuclear-powered submarine may be years from sea trials and is unproven. Even its tactical nuclear submarine appears to be a retrofitted Romeo with severe design compromises. Maintenance across the force is uneven. Spare parts are a chronic headache. And while the new M2020 tank glitters on TV, producing and fielding them in meaningful numbers, then supporting them with crews, logistics, and doctrine would test even a wealthy state. Pyongyang is not a wealthy state. The gap between "we built 9 prototypes" and "we can field 9 battalions" is the size of a mountain range.
North Korea's military looks like a 1998 desktop tower with the brand new graphics card jammed into it. Parts of the system scream, parts wheeze. The whole thing still boots, and if you're on the receiving end, it can crash your day. It's not elegant. It doesn't have to be. The Russia Treaty tilts the chessboard further, with a mutual defense clause on paper and an exchange of materiel in practice. Pyongyang enjoys diplomatic cover and technical assistance, while Moscow plugs gaps in its own war machine with DPRK shells and missiles. That two-way street is why the treaty has been described as one of Russia's most significant Asian moves in years. And it's why Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington have intensified trilateral coordination, missile defense integration, and discussions, still sensitive, about nuclear planning. The fewer seams allies show, the less tempting it is for Kim to probe them. What about 2026's opening signals? North Korea closed 2025 with fresh cruise missile launches. KCNA's euphemism, strategic, again doing heavy lifting, and showcased work on a nuclear-powered sub, while hinting at a 5-year munitions expansion through the next party Congress. If that Congress blesses higher missile and shell output, expect more tests calibrated to political calendars in Seoul and Washington. Expect, too, continued hypersonic branding and more solid fuel demonstrations, because each test forces adversaries to spend money on interceptors and sensors. It's the cost imposition game in reverse, played by a sanction-strapped state that's shockingly good at it.
Let's zoom back to that M2020, because it symbolises the broader story. The tank's best features, a thermal sight suite, a modern fire control system, and a potential hard kill protection array would drag KPA armour out of the 1970s. The strangest features, external ATGM pods on a main battle tank and turret cutouts for APS launchers, raise eyebrows about survivability and practicality under fire. But whether it's battlefield ready today is almost beside the point. It's proof of concept that North Korea can assemble complex, modernized systems despite sanctions, probably with foreign component help. And it forces Seoul to plan for a future where KPA armour isn't just a target gallery for top attack drones. If you're building force structure for the 2030s, you take that seriously. Cyber deserves a second look too, because it's the least predictable leg of the deterrent stool. North Korean operators don't just steal funds. They gather credentials, plant backdoors, and learn the terrain of critical infrastructure. It's not headline grabbing like a missile parade, but in a crisis, the ability to flicker bank networks, jam logistics software, or threaten ransomware against hospitals is coercive power. It buys leverage in the grey zone, and it ships hard currency to missile plants when no one is looking. That's why Allied reporting keeps warning that DPRK crypto thefts and cyber espionage now function as a budget line for its weapons programs. It's quiet, cheap, and effective. A rare trifecta.
So what happens if war breaks out tomorrow? Short answer, nobody sane wants to find out. In the opening hours, the KPA would try to saturate air defences with ballistic and cruise missiles, lean on sleeper artillery plans to pound command nodes and dense urban districts, push special operations teams through tunnels and coastal infiltration routes, and threaten nuclear escalation if momentum turns south. The alliance would try to blind and burn, kill radars, muzzle artillery, crater runways, decapitate C2, and hunt TELs in a race against time. The horrible constant is civilian vulnerability. Seoul's proximity to the border guarantees pain, even if Allied forces rapidly suppress the barrage. And looming over the conventional fight is Kim's starter nuclear arsenal. The deterrent that makes even limited war a Russian roulette nobody wants to play. The longer the KPA can keep a handful of road mobile launchers hidden, the more leverage Pyongyang retains. Here is the quiet strategic twist of 2026. North Korea is less isolated than at any point since the Cold War. The Russia Treaty is real, the UN monitoring panel is gone, and a wartime European adversary is paying for DPRK shells in political IOUs and technical crumbs. Meanwhile, China remains the indispensable neighbour,
calibrating pressure and lifelines to keep the peninsula stable on Beijing's terms. Against that backdrop, each North Korean test is not just a spike on a chart. It's a signal to multiple audiences at once: the Allies, the domestic elite, Moscow, and Beijing. That multi-audience signaling is why the missiles keep flying, even when sanctions bite. All of which leaves us with the big question you clicked for. How insanely powerful is North Korea's military in 2026? Insane isn't the right adjective. Calculated is better. The KPA is a force whose conventional baseline is uneven, whose showcase projects oscillate between breakthrough and cosplay, and whose true bite comes from the trio of nuclear weapons, proliferating missiles, and catastrophic artillery. Add in cyber thefts that bankroll the enterprise, and a newly formalized link to Russia that lubricates supply chains, and you get a deterrent that is, in strategic terms, alarmingly robust for a country so poor. North Korea can likely devastate Seoul in the short term, threaten US and Japanese bases with salvos of SRBMs and IRBMs, and hold at least part of the continental United States at risk with a small but growing set of solid-fuel ICBMs. Its air and naval power would struggle to survive a sustained fight against Allied air dominance, but that's not what Pyongyang plans to do. It plans to survive politically, not win kinetically, to absorb pressure, impose costs, and force a stalemate under a nuclear shadow. In that mission, it is grimly, coldly capable. A few closing thoughts for 2026. Expect more missile tests timed to elections and summits. Expect more cruise shots labelled strategic. Expect satellite launches and announcements about nuclear submarines, even if timelines slip. Expect more cyber raids against exchanges and defense firms. Expect Russia to keep the door open, sometimes wide, sometimes cracked, to North Korean materiel, and expect more evidence to leak via debris in Ukraine. Above all, expect North Korea to keep playing for perception. In deterrence, perception buys time, and time buys warheads. So, how powerful is it? Powerful enough that miscalculation would be catastrophic. Not a peer to the United States or even South Korea in a fair fight. But deterrence isn't a fair fight. It's a bet that the other side won't stake everything on the outcome. On that front, Pyongyang's ledger is in the black. The only real question for 2026 is whether the region can lower the temperature without rewarding the behavior that raised it. That's a diplomatic riddle wrapped in a missile canister, rolling past a grandstand under the neon lights. And until someone solves it, the Korean People's Army will keep marching to the drumbeat it wrote for itself.